Hello and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host for today, Simon Hodgkins, and I'm delighted to be joined today by our very own Fiachra Synnott. Fiachra is a Project Management Operations Director here at Vistatec. You're very welcome, Fiachra.
Thank you very much. Very glad to be here.
It's great to have you here. I understand you're a trilingual industry leader, and I know you've got a tremendous amount of expertise when it comes to the whole world of project management at a senior level and localization, which I'm sure our listeners are going to be interested in today. So let's move on and get on to the show. I want to jump straight into the discussion and ask you about this fast-paced, moving world of project management, because I think you're in at the very high level of project management. So what attracted you to it, and how did you find yourself doing this type of role?
So yes, that's a great question. So just to take you back a little bit in time. So I started off my career in localization in an LQA position. So that's localization quality assurance. And while I really enjoyed the job, at some stage, I realized that you only tend to see a very small part of the whole process of localization. Now, as people may or may not be aware, localization, while being very niche, is also a very detailed and complex process. And at some stage, after a few years of doing QA, I really wanted to get like the bigger picture. And I also probably, with some more idealism of youth, I also wanted to make more of an impact in terms of delivering the best quality product that I could for my internal client at the time. That was many moons ago. And if you were to ask me, what is it that keeps me plugged in to the world of project management? I think that with project management, while you still have your ABCs like in any industry, there is always something different. Each client is different. Each project is different. And even though at this stage of my career, I am no longer hands-on, except when I need to be, I still enjoy the challenge of, I would say, effectively problem solving and getting the best result that we possibly can with everything except for the kitchen sink thrown at us.
Very good. Thank you, Fiachra. And just to expand that a little bit, because I know your background, you've got a bit of gaming in there. You've obviously got tons of localization experience and digital goods from companies like Electronic Arts. So maybe could you just share a little bit more about that sort of background?
Yes. So I started my localization career almost by accident, which sometimes happens in localization. And as you mentioned, I do speak languages. And at the time, I was very keen on video games. I still am, but I just don't have the time anymore. And I thought, why not try and marry my professional growth and needs with my hobby and my passion. And I was very lucky enough to start off in what is now Activision Dublin, but back then it was called something else, in East Point. And they were very generous, and they took me in, and that's where I started in, as I said before, in QA, and then in project management, and then senior project management. I then moved on to Electronic Arts in Madrid, where I stayed for quite a while, and I moved up through the ranks of management, etc. And that's really sort of the overview. Now, in terms of, if you were to say to me, what makes gaming and gaming localization different from localization, it's basically, it's a niche within a niche. So localization, as people may or may not know, is a very specialized industry or area of the industry. And then if you add gaming on top of that, that makes it an extremely narrow but very interesting focus. I guess probably as well what I would say, and especially maybe for people who are starting their career in localization, I mean, the one thing that I really liked about video game localization is the relaxed attitude. Now, when I say relaxed attitude, it doesn't mean that you don't have to work, because in video games, there are peaks and valleys, and you have to work very, very hard during those times. But at the same time, usually you have a lot of laid back people, and you also just have a company where flexibility works both ways. And I have to say as well, just because it it is true as well. In Vistatec, I have found the same kind of feeling, and that's what I feel makes my job in Vistatec also rewarding. Then in terms of the gaming side, so just because I haven't mentioned this before, so most of my career was spent on the client side, so I was actually in an internal localization team, which obviously is slightly different to the model that we offer here at Vistatec. However, internally, you always have your stakeholders, you always have the product teams that you need to partner with and deliver. So then in terms of digital goods, I did sort of at the tail end of my time with EA, I also worked with the internal marketing teams there to try and partner and get them the best quality localization, but also with that local marketing glow for all of their localization products, whether it be web pages, campaigns, etc.
Excellent. I kind of got a feeling there that you've summarized that quite well. I'm sure that was a very hectic time, particularly you mentioned some of the brands in the gaming sector. You know, I mean, if you think about some of the game releases in this day and age, they're bigger than some Hollywood movie releases now, aren't they? So that's a very fast-paced area to be involved in for sure.
Yeah.
So look, could you, thank you very much for sharing that, Fiachra. Can you maybe expand for our listeners on the role that you have today, though, because you're sort of the project management operations director at Vistatec, which is a senior role throughout the company. And I know you look after very, very large global accounts. And maybe just could you unpack a little bit for us about what a role like that entails and kind of what's involved?
Sure. So when I took on this role nearly 2 years ago, I basically came in and I wanted to, I guess, without sounding boastful, I wanted to share the expertise that I'd acquired on the client side and try and expand it outside of the world of video games as well. As you've mentioned, Simon, I do have the honor and privilege of working with some of the top brands, household brands that people would know. But what I try and do, as I tell my team, so project management can be as basic or as complex as you want. What I tell my team is there are two fundamentals: flawless delivery and also excellent customer relationship. So what I try and do with my team, which is one of the larger teams, I would say, if I'm not wrong, in Vistatec, is we try and focus on those two things, really, which is whatever the client throws at us, to use that expression, or whatever that the client asks us to do, then we basically do it. And in an ideal situation, we would have predictability and visibility in terms of what's coming down the pipeline, what the expectations are. As we know, we all live in the real world, and it doesn't necessarily happen that way. So really, we have to deliver no matter what. We have to deliver whether it's a flawless execution or whether the client suddenly has an urgent request that we need to deliver. And particularly with one of our larger brands, they are very, very focused on quality. Therefore, my team, and obviously, one of the accounts, we also have quality specialists there. So it's a collective effort. I just want to say that. But we are really, really focused on flawless delivery, but also excellent quality, and also just delivering what the client needs.
Excellent. And yeah, that flawless delivery that you're talking about there, it's so important. And it reminds me of how, particularly over the last period of time that we've all been going through with the global pandemic, how flawless delivery, quality, but also agility and this fast-paced requirement to make changes in lots of brands. It's been a sort of a three-way mix, hasn't it? It's sort of like we need it now, we need it at speed, but the quality must be high. And I also want flawless delivery. Like there are no exceptions there really for some of these top global brands.
Exactly.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. So can we talk a little bit about communication now? Because obviously you've mentioned teams and people, and it's a team effort. And obviously effective communication for any type of project management is important. You've sort of touched on how you have to listen to the client's needs. And then of course you've got to communicate with various teams, departments, I'm sure lots of different stakeholders internally and externally. So what are your thoughts on effective communication for somebody in a role such as yourself, or for anybody who was thinking about getting started in the world of project management?
Yes, so you're totally right, Simon. Effective communication and optimal communication are one of the key assets that you would need as a project manager. Whether you are basically on the vendor side, the client side, what you want is you want somebody who will listen to you, understand and get what your brand is all about, what the actual project's framework is, and what are the priorities. Now, obviously, we all know that everything can't be a priority. However, as you've touched on before, for most people, and especially the bigger brands of this world, they want perfection, or as close to perfection as possible. And part of that, as a project manager, you have to be intuitive, and you also have to listen. Especially at first, you have to listen a lot. You have to almost put yourself, or be empathetic and put yourself in the shoes of your client, whether they're an external client like the model that we use in Vistatec, or internal like I had previously in my career. You really need to sort of bond with that person, and that's sort of the initial thing. And then obviously at all stages of the project, you need to also, it's not just about regular calls or Zooms. It's not just about emails, but it's also about making sure that both parties know what to expect and what they need from each other, because it's like a symbiotic relationship. The same way a localization project manager can deliver very good results. However, the client obviously then needs to provide the minimum that we would need, and probably in our line of business, it's that predictability and visibility, especially in terms of what kind of workload is coming down the pipeline. Now, as I said before, you can't always get that kind of predictability and visibility. And here at Vistatec, we are very flexible, and we put a big focus on scalability of our model to meet unexpected needs. But at the same time, if there's a failure in communication, then you can pretty much sometimes just write off the general experience. So communication, yet again, is absolutely key.
Okay, thank you, Fiachra. I just want to expand on that question a little bit if I can, because you're talking about some of the keys there to providing this world-class project management. But I'm interested in maybe some of the expectations. You mentioned some of the expectations that people want are extremely high, and particularly for core areas of importance for some of these global brands. Has that changed in recent times? Is it the same as it's always been? Is the standard of quality getting higher and higher? Like, what are your views on that?
So it depends on the brand. So in my experience, some brands start off with extremely high quality expectations anyway, and therefore you wouldn't really see a lot of variance there. It's also true as well that some brands, it's like the famous pyramid. We have the quality, time, and money, and therefore some people start off with one side of the triangle, which is quality, and one of our top brands definitely is all about quality. There are other brands who they may not have such an extensive budget for localization, and therefore they usually start off with time, or money. Now, it's also true that in Vistatec, like in any localization project management organization that's worth its salt, part of the localization project manager's job is to explain the balance between those three. The same way that it is very hard to achieve and very expensive to achieve 100% quality all the time. Some brands can afford it, some can't, but then it's also the project manager's role to find the right balance for the client. And therefore, that's where there's a term that I know it's overused these days, but I really put a lot of store in it. It's partnership. So whether you're an internal team or whether you're an external team, you really have to move away, I believe, from the transactional to the partnership. You have to basically think of what is the best. If I were in my client's shoes, what would I want, and how can I achieve that?
Yeah, I think moving away from transactional to partnership really is key, isn't it? And I know a lot of the the brands that you deal with have been very long-term customers who continue to grow. And that's a really, really good point, that sort of long-term partnership, isn't it? So can I just ask you a little bit about the translation and localization side of things? And my question really is this, Fiachra, you know, how important do you think it is now that we talk more about global content solutions as opposed to just simply talking about localization and translation?
Yes, no, very good question. And actually it ties in nicely to what I was mentioning about partnership. I mean, for me, and I'll expand on this, but the bottom line for me is it would be extremely hard, if not impossible, to achieve that kind of partnership that I was describing in my last answer without a global content solution. And if you want to sort of, for me to use the transactional versus the partnership thing again, if we talk about simple localization or translation, that is transactional. Now, it is true that sometimes we will have clients who don't necessarily have a constant or big need for localized or reviewed volumes. And therefore, you know what, that's the transactional model probably works for them. However, with most, if not all of our clients, especially the bigger brands of this world, they are generating an awful amount of content in their original language, which usually, I mean, with the world the way it is today, it's usually in English. So it's, and therefore, in my experience, if you do not have a global content solution, then you're missing out on a lot. You're missing out on the partnership, but then you're also missing out on, for example, if you have a partnership with a localization vendor, as I said before, whether external or internal, so that symbiotic relationship really actually does shine through. And how does that shine through? Because if you have a global content solution, then you're actually creating a common corporate culture in a way. And that can go from, say, marketing content. As we know, marketing content is probably one of the trickiest areas of content to get right. Why? Because it's not just simple translation. What works, say, in marketing copy in English, if you just do a simple translation of that into, say, French, then you are going to lose that marketing magic. And therefore, there we sort of move more into almost the world of transcreation, which is, it's not just a question of translation, it's a question of culturalizing that content for the right market. Now, of course, that's just talking about country per country, but also, as we know, each brand has their own sort of spin on how they want to position their product. And that's where, if you have a true partnership through the global content solutions, you can actually provide that. And it's also, the other point as well that I'd like to make on this is that in Vistatec, we are very much about requesting a seat at the table. Why do we do that? Because we also believe that we have an added value as experts. So as we know, consulting with experts brings a very big added value to your business. And therefore, we just so happen to be localization and translation experts. And therefore, if we do have a long-term relationship, which is broader than just a transactional, we can also then advise our client brands how best to go about, whether it's review, translation, etc. So for me, if you have a constant sort of feed of volume that you need to get out to the global market, you need to go with global content solutions.
Thank you very much indeed, Fiachra, for sharing that knowledge with us. So I suppose as we're sort of coming towards the end of our time here today, but I wanted to squeeze in a few more questions if I can. And I wanted to ask you about the period of time that we're all working through, you know, particularly when it comes to remote working, home working. It's a topic on everybody's agenda. It's in all the media. First of all, has remote working made any difference to your organization, your departments around the world? Do you think it will make a difference in the future? Or is it just business as usual for you? What are your thoughts on this whole remote working, hybrid working phenomenon?
Okay, so one thing that I would like to say is that even before the pandemic hit us and obviously forced us almost to change the way we work, in Vistatec, and especially in the brands that I basically work with, we already had a follow the sun model. This, as it does what it says on the tin. So follow the sun effectively means that we can actually match the global reach of our client brands. and we can actually continue a 24-hour cycle around the world. And in my particular case, I have teams in the Americas, I have teams in Europe, and I have teams in Asia. I guess probably the biggest impact that I have seen is that before COVID came along, I almost had a hybrid solution, whereby I had teams that were already fully remote, but I also had a core team that wasn't. And before, say about 2 years ago, 100% of the headquarters-based team were actually all office people. Obviously, what we had to do, like pretty much any other company in the world, is we had to let go of that concept and adapt to that. And what has happened, at least in my office-bound team, to call it that way, is that we have actually, because we continue to grow and continue to expand with our long partnership with the brands, we have actually started to also hire remote workers outside of what in our case would be the Dublin area. And what I would say as well is, obviously it's a big, as you said, it's a topic in everybody's mind. So the hybrid working and returning to work, I would say that apart from that, it's going to be business as usual. I mean, our model has been very resilient to remote working, just because it was the way that we had already had it set up. Therefore, while people will be looking forward to seeing their colleagues back at work, in terms of the actual delivering our optimal services to clients, it hasn't really made a difference, and I don't expect it to make much of a difference.
Very interesting. Thank you. So look, we've covered an awful lot there about your past experiences, and hopefully we've shared some insight into the wonderful world of all the areas that you're involved in Vistatec. Outside of work, Fiachra, can I just maybe finish off with asking you, outside of work, what about interests, hobbies? What do you enjoy doing when you're not deep in this world that we've been describing so far?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned before, so when I have the time, I do still enjoy a gaming session now and again. Obviously, I don't have the time, and then as age catches up with you, your reflexes, your hand-to-eye coordination starts to go a bit. So I just can't compete anymore with the young crowd. But still, I like to put my hat in the ring. Then apart from that, I'm also quite a bit of a sports fanatic. So I run, I go to the gym. I play a Latin American sport called paddle, which is not very well known outside, but it's a mix between squash and tennis. And then I have been known to do martial arts in the past. I'm probably getting a bit to my peak there as well. And then apart from that, I'm a history buff. I love history. Any kind of history is a good book for me to sit down and enjoy. And I think that's pretty much covers all the main outside interests I may have.
That's about everything you can fit in by the sound of it. Yeah. No, exactly, fantastic. Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Fiachra. Yeah. Well, listen, that kind of brings us to the end of today's discussion. I really do appreciate you taking some time out of your busy work schedule to join us here on VistaTalks. So thank you, Fiachra.
Thanks, Simon.
Look, that's the end of today's show, everybody, with Fiachra Synnott, the Project Management Operations Director here at Vistatec. So please make sure to tune in again to see and or listen to the next episode of VistaTalks, where once again, we hope to be discussing more interesting topics with interesting people from all around the world. Thank you, Fiachra.
Thank you.